Unbillable hours, why do they exist? After my video dropped for the 280 SL, 250 SL, and 230 SL restoration costs, I was a little bit curious to see what people to say. And a lot of people are sympathetic about this thing, but they ask me, where do all these unbillable hours come from? Where do they come from? And we're going to present a couple of ethical scenarios here that myself and some other people that own garages have run into, so that we can talk about why some mechanics can charge for unbillable hours and why they can't, and what the ultimate goal is. So the ultimate goal is always to get the car back on the road, working better than you found it, working like it is supposed to in a way that the person who owns it can enjoy it. Sometimes that means there's got to be some self-sacrifice on our part, because even though doing 50, 60, 70, 80 hours of work over the course of 6 to 8 months for free, literally for free, is not fun, sometimes it is necessary, and we're going to talk about where that goes. So scenario number one, I call these the ethics problems of being a mechanic. Let's say you get a customer in the shop, they bring you a car, the car needs like 150 hours of work, and you start digging into that sucker and you find out that the engine is bad. But wait, you've already done 20 hours of engine repairs. You already did a compression test. It seemed okay. You adjusted the valves. You did an oil change. You replaced a water pump. You replaced all the cooling hoses. You went through the ignition system. You replaced a couple of gaskets and fixed oil leaks. But wait, there's more. You replaced all the belts on the motor. You did some fine tuning on it. But then you started to notice that there's some oil pressure issues. Or when the engine's hot, it doesn't idle very well. Or when there are you notice that there are some problems with the engine starting smoothly in the morning. Or it just doesn't feel smooth. It feels like go, 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 go. You know, it just doesn't feel quite right. What do you do after you've done all that work? Our practice is to actually apply some of those hours, not all of them, but some of them as a credit if the engine has a major issue that requires removal and rebuilding. I don't really enjoy doing engine extraction, but we do it because we always want the cars to be better. Now, if I were to bill the customer for all of this work, plus the work to remove the engine, plus the work to rebuild the engine, I still don't think it's fair, because sometimes even though the engine sort of slips under the radar, you learn from your mistakes, and you have to say to yourself, why didn't we compression test the engine or do an oil analysis when it showed up? Should have done that. And there are scenarios where that can be prevented, identified. There's scenarios where we're just too stupid to know better. Now, I have a friend who has another shop, and he did significant work on another Mercedes that had been sitting for a long time, and the engine was stuck, and he managed to get the engine unstuck and got the engine running, but it didn't run well. It had low compression in one cylinder, and it seemed like there may have been some coolant intrusion or some head gasket deterioration. And so, because people have to pay their bills, he had to bill for all that work. And the guy did get a running car. But at the end of the day, the car still needed to have the engine rebuilt. He still was in the car for, 50-ish hours. But the customer couldn't afford the engine rebuild. He was unhappy at having to pay for 50, 60 redundant hours of labor. And of course, my friend realized he should have rebuilt the engine to begin with. But how can you know? Sometimes, how can you know? When an engine gets stuck, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. How can you know? So the ethical dilemma is, do you credit the customer back or not? Now, if it is a life or death matter, and if you don't cover these costs, and the time you spent, the time you paid your employees, the time you spent on the engine, and if it's a life or death matter, meaning your business isn't going to be here, by all means, charge the time. It's part of the risk of getting an older car. If I were in that situation, somebody did it to me, you know what I would say? I understand that this is what you have to do to keep your business working. Fine. I'll do what I can, But at the end of the day, the car went home running and driving, but not running and driving well, not idling nicely, not running smoothly, not making full power. The customer was still on the hook for a lot of money, and he had no more money to put into the car. And what do you do? What do you do? It's really sad. I mean, at least the car runs, but the guy needs, money to put in his car too to make it even better. And you have to redo some of the same work, maybe not all the same work, but a lot of the same work over again. Now, when we run into this scenario, because I can afford to, I will credit back some of the labor hours, as many of you have noticed. But there are other scenarios where I ask myself this question. Let's say I have to go back and tune an injection pump over and over again. Do I give up maybe 25 hours of labor so that I can close a $15,000, $20,000 invoice? Now, this invoice doesn't occur over the course of a day or a month. It's broken up into work cycles over the period of 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, a year. It's broken up in increments. So it sounds like a lot of money, but if you look at what each car nets per month, it doesn't work that way. But in order to get that final number across the finish line, what do we have to do? Well, I have to be generous, because I realize that not everybody is as generous with me as I am with them, but I would still rather go to bed at night thinking I am the most generous person I can be, whether it's with my customers or with my suppliers. Because if you're not generous with your customers, you will develop a reputation of being more interested in money than getting their car right. And one thing that is very difficult, especially when you have a near $200 an hour labor rate, is communicating to customers that your primary interest is in getting their car running. The labor rate here doesn't exist because I like money. I'm not really a very wealthy person. I'm doing better than the average person in their who's just about to be 40 and has a child, but I'm not making, defense contractor money. I'm not looking at my next 5,000 square foot house in the river, but I realize that the ethics of this, of giving people, my dad is saying, give people more than you take from them. And that's very hard at a $200 an hour labor rate, because people look at that stuff. Now, people ask me this question: why do you do that? You shouldn't do that. You shouldn't do that to people. You should make them pay for every hour you work. Well, why do I do it? I ask myself, why do I do it? Because it doesn't feel right if I don't give people more than I take for them. It just doesn't feel right. I can't go to bed at night. I wake up in the middle of the night with anxiety. I would choose poverty all day over having the feeling of anxiety, or the feeling like I've taken advantage of or wronged a person. Because the feeling of anxiety from doing something wrong, you might call it, some people might call it Catholic guilt. Some people might call it having too strong of a moral compass or not being self-interested enough. But I do feel like it is my duty and obligation to determine what's fair, because the customer can't. The goalposts will always move. So I have to pick an ethical position when it comes to unbillable labor hours. And I have to stick with that ethical position, because I can't apply it differently to people based on their socioeconomic levels. So what do? Well, you usually choose the position that benefits the customer who is in the most vulnerable financial position. Now, there's some people that have no business coming into the shop. So we can't do everything for free. If that's the case, my advice is learn to work on your own car. Learn to do it yourself. Or, hey, I'll help you out. Pick up a mop and start scrubbing. But I don't like to trade labor for labor. I'm not a barterer. Somebody always ends up getting the worst end of the deal when you're the barterer, and usually it's the person who's giving the most valuable service away. I don't like the idea, though, of taking more from people than they pay me for. It just doesn't feel right, and it doesn't sit well with me, and I just think it's the wrong thing to do. So, who cares? You know, at the end of the day, look, I'm probably not going to retire from this. I'm probably going to keep doing this until it kills me, or until, I don't know, but I'm going to be here. I'm going to be an old man. You know, I know it. I know it in my heart, and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't make me upset at night. What makes me upset is when people rake me over the coals when they know that I'm waking up every morning at 5:30 and going to bed at night at 11, when I'm working hard all day long in their cars. I don't take time off to go have fun. If I travel somewhere, usually it's because there's something related to work. You know, the only people that I really that really are more important to me than my employees are my family. You know, I don't see myself putting them second ever, but sometimes I tell my customers, remember that I do have a small family. I do have a small child. I want her to have the best. I do have a wife that takes care of that child and her parents. I want her to make sure that she's comfortable, you know? What can we do? All right, so they're my ethics. We'll see you guys in the next video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you for listening. Enjoy working on your classic Mercedes. And remember that if somebody's charging you for every hour they've worked, and they have to do to keep the doors open and everybody paid and happy, that's fine. It's right. It's when you're not getting what you pay for when there's a problem.